Do you want to, can you unshare for the moment just to show your pretty face?
Yeah.
There we go. All right. If we can get everyone just to take a seat for us, that would be wonderful. Can everyone see that TV okay? Or do you want the lights on? Turn the lights off. Is that all good? Are we okay? All right, we all ready to go? Can we get everyone to take a seat, please? So I can get Melissa to introduce herself, please. All right. So we've got the awesome pleasure of having Melissa Jackson, who's the Secretary of the Australian Society under Victoria, to give us a chat on Gorbak. So we were very lucky at the conference this year, last year that Melissa actually gave us this particular talk. It's pretty spectacular. So without further ado, Em, over to you.
Thanks, Beck. Much appreciated. Give me 1 second. I share my screen. And turn my camera off. All righty. So as Beck said, this is a talk I did at the convention last year at New South Wales. So sorry if you were at the convention and you've got to listen to me again, but I hope you enjoyed it enough the first time that you don't mind too much. So it's really a bit of a story about a bucket list of 8 species of plant that I never really kind of knew was going to end up as a bucket list. So I was very lucky back in 2018 and did a trip to Madagascar. And like a lot of people, I went there to see the really unique habitat, the amazing plants and animals, and of course, the baobabs, being incredibly intrigued by photos that I'd seen of the famous Avenue of the Baobabs near Morindava. And so I must say I was not at all disappointed by the island. It's an amazing place, very, very beautiful. And on finishing the trip, I must say I totally fell in love with baobabs. Didn't matter how many I saw, which species it was, they just took my breath away every single time I saw one, whether it was up close or off in the distance. And here, this photo is from Avenue of the Baobabs, or the French name is, oh no, actually, I'm not even going to try and do that. But basically, the species of baobab at Avenue of the Baobabs is Grandidieri. So it's probably one of the more photographed ones, but the best known one, of course, is what people call the tree of life. Which is Adansonia digitata, which is from Africa. So there are 8 Adansonia species in total. The one from Africa, 6 Madagascan species, and of course our own Australian species. And that's it. 8 species of this plant or this tree worldwide. And so not very many at all. And of course, the distribution, if you kind of think about it, is really weird. 1 in Africa, 1 in Australia, and 6 in Madagascar. So, of course, the belief has long since been that the origin of these plants was Africa, with Adansonia digitata being the species from which all of the others were descended. And the common theories for how it became distributed to Madagascar and Australia was during the breakup of Gondwanaland, seed being transported by humans, or seed pods or plants, small plants floating across the ocean, in a sort of cluster of other plants and those sorts of things. And so if we look at that distribution of baobabs in a little more detail, got this great image here from a journal article that was published last year, which I'll talk a bit more about on the next slide. But if we start on the left of the screen, give me 2 seconds, I'll get my laser pointer going. If we start on the left of the screen, you'll see that we've got the distribution in Africa here in green, okay? For Australia, over to the right, our own Gregory is just in that northwest region. And then in Madagascar, you'll see the 6 species are isolated to the west coast. So southwest, up the west coast, and then sort of up the northwest. And I'll talk a little bit more about why they sort of grow in this region a little bit further on. Oh, sorry, I should mention that 3 of Madagascar's 6 species are actually on the IUCN list as endangered or critically endangered. Based on recent research, there have been calls to actually increase that monitoring of the species due to a large number of recent deaths of very old trees, both in Africa and Madagascar. Most likely, of course, due to climate change impacts as well as impacts by humans through due to things like deforestation and farming. So that recent study that I mentioned previously, in which the image on the previous slide came from, was a genetic study of Adansonia. That study by Wan et al. Was published earlier last year, and they concluded that the Adansonia genus is about 41.1 million years old, and the diversification into the 8 species that we have now happened about 12 to 20 million years ago. And the origin is Madagascar. So the theories of it being descended from the African species is totally wrong. So all of the Adansonia species we have originated in Madagascar. The distribution theories have also been a little bit blown out of the water. So the diversification of the species to 12 to 20 million years ago demonstrates that it can't have been spread through the breakup of Gondwana land. And the timing doesn't work with human distribution either. So the theory, or, not 100% proven, nobody was around back then to see what was going on and write it down. But the most likely distribution method was actually seed pods or small plants traveling as part of vegetation rafts. So that's how we ended up with the species in Africa and in Australia. The genetic testing also identified that there's a great lack of genetic diversity in some of the Malagasy species of Adansonia, and that actually places them at a higher risk of extinction. Which, when you've only got 8 species and 6 of those are in Madagascar, that would be a really sad thing to happen. So for those who don't know, I've had so many people ask me since I've been there, where is Madagascar? So while I'm sure you're all dying to see amazing pictures of baobabs, I have to tell you a little bit more about Madagascar first. So It's the world's fourth largest island. It's located in the Indian Ocean, about 400 kilometres east off the coast of Mozambique. So there it is there, the big red arrow and the dashed box. That's Madagascar there, and Mozambique is over here. So a little bit of brief history. It was colonized by Austronesians from Indonesia, and then the Bantu people from Mozambique around 350 BC to 550 AD. French colonization of Madagascar occurred in the 19th century, and they gained independence from the French in 1960. Sadly, though, in more recent times, economic development of the country has been very much hindered by political and civil unrest, as well as corruption at all levels of government, which is very, very, it's very obvious when you're there and you're visiting. The corruption, it's very, very out in the open, happens all the time, and it's very, very sad to see the impact that it's having on this very, very beautiful country. So the population, this data is a little bit old, and of course, we're looking at a third world country. It's sixth poorest country in the world, so they don't have annual census type things like we have, and their records, of course, are not as good as ours either. But the population's estimated to be about 26 million. Of those, about 90% are Malagasy people, the original ethnic people of Madagascar, and there are about 18 ethnic groups. As you can see on the map here, these are the 18 different sort of ethnic groups and their original sort of areas of habitat or living prior to the French colonization. Literacy rate is about what you would expect for a third world country, where only about 65% of the population are literate. And Madagascar, the locals shorten the name to Mada. It's got two official languages, Malagasy and French. I did try to learn a little bit of Malagasy, but I found it very, very difficult. And there's actually 23 dialects of Malagasy. So I'm not surprised that I didn't do very well learning it. Even though French is an official language and it is taught in secondary schools, it is a second language, and it's generally only used by those living in larger cities or those who are sort of working in businesses where they're having to deal with a lot of foreigners, because the majority of foreigners are French expats. And so only about 20% of the population actually speak French. So if you are planning on visiting Madagascar, it's not the kind of country where you kind of book a hire car and drive yourself around. You really need a local guide to help you communicate with the locals and get you around the country. A lot of the roads are also very, very bad and not great signposting and things like that. There's also huge swathes of the country where there's no phone reception. And so, you can't just sort of rip out a Google Maps to get you around either. So you do need local assistance to help you get around. Economics-wise, the currency is the Malagasy area. So their largest note is 20,000 area, which is equivalent, sounds like a lot, doesn't it, 20,000 area, but it's equivalent to approximately sort of $8 Australian, depending upon the exchange rate. So according to the World Bank, Mada is the sixth poorest country in the world. and an estimated 75% of the population live on less than $2.50 a day, and the average wage is about $518 Australian a month. And so it's not unusual to see, even in the capital city of Antananarivo, or Tanna as it's shortened to see locals using, these are the local cattle, which are called zebu, and they use them for transport. This was out in a country area, but you will see these in the capital city and in towns very, very commonly. Their major economic sources are exports. Agriculture is very, very important. One of their largest crops that they export is rice, and you can see areas in the image at the top here that are being developed for rice production. Very little of this farming is actually done with the modern machinery that we would see here in Australia. The methods are still very much all done by hand or using cattle. They also produce a lot of textiles and, of course, mining. We did see some areas of mining. More recently, they have a new and burgeoning tourism industry. So if you've been thinking at all about going on an overseas holiday to see some amazing plants and experience something completely different, do think about going to Madagascar. You know, the more support they get for their tourism industry, you know, and traveling to those smaller areas does also help to support those smaller communities. So, you know, it's a great way to help support developing countries like this. So if we think about the climate, and to sort of assist you with this, you guys being Queenslanders, you'll totally understand this concept of not having 4 seasons, but really just having a wet and a dry season. That's not what we experience down here in Melbourne, where we can have 4 seasons in one day. And so you can see Madagascar sort of fits into Queensland weather conditions quite well. So in the wet season, it's hot, rainy, and humid. In the dry season, it's cooler with little to no rain at all. Now, the other important thing to notice here is that the east coast of Madagascar is basically open to the Indian Ocean. Apart from a few little islands, there's really nothing between it and Australia, whereas the west coast sort of butts up against Mozambique here in Africa, and here we've got the Mozambique Channel. So this becomes really, really important when we look at the geography and the ecology of the island, because how it's sort of positioned very much impacts its sort of microclimates in the different regions. So if we look at the geography, that east coast, which butts up against the Indian Ocean, is all tropical lowland forest. So it gets all the predominant rain clouds coming in off the Indian Ocean, and all of the rain kind of gets dumped here. This white region, okay, is the Central Highlands. So this is a big, huge sandstone massif that runs basically right up through the middle of the island, and it's what's known as subhumid forest. The west and south of the island are broken up into succulent woodland and basically, you know, spiny forest and dry deciduous forest up here. Okay, so as the weather comes in from the east, the rain gets dumped here, and then the west and southwest all sit in this sort of rain shadow of this big sandstone massif that runs up the center of the country. So all of the west and southwest is really, really dry area. And that's, of course, where all the plants that we love, our aloes, our pachypodiums, and, of course, the baobabs grow, because they are succulent species. So it's estimated that sort of matter split off from everywhere else about 88 million years ago. And that relative isolation over such a huge amount of time has resulted in native plants and animals evolving in such a way that we've got a massive biodiversity hotspot in Madagascar. About 90% of all the plant and animal species are endemic, and that means they're not found anywhere else in the world as far as natural habitat goes. So approximately 75% of the fauna in Madagascar is endemic. They have 241 species of mammals. 105 of those are lemurs. You can see some pictures here of some of the lemurs that I saw. The mouse lemur, which is what you can see here, it's the smallest of the lemur species. And the main predator of the lemur is what's known as the fossa. Unfortunately, I didn't get to see a fossa. You know, I hope if I get to go back next time, I might get to see a fossa, but apparently it's a very rare thing. The country also has 406 endemic species of reptiles, of which 134 of those are chameleons. They have 288 bird species and 311 amphibians, which is just a crazy, crazy number. Chameleons, by the way, that's about 2/3 of the world's species of chameleons. So, you know, huge number of species. So very, very important to be able to maintain this habitat. So the flora, of course, which is the thing we're interested in the most, approximately 80% of the flora is endemic. It has 55% of the world's Dideraceae family species. So from our perspective, that includes things like Alouardia, Alouardiopsis, Dacarii, Didiaria species, etc. 80% of the world's Pachypodium species, 67% of the Adansonia species. It has 130 species of aloe, as well as other really amazing plants such as orchids and palms as well. So finally, here I am. I'm going to talk to you about baobabs. So something a lot of people don't know is they're actually deciduous trees. So I see a lot of comments on Facebook posts where the photo is a picture of the tree with no leaves, and everyone's like, oh my God, it's dying because of climate change and humans. And it's probably just that the tree is dormant, exactly the same as when you see, you know, an English deciduous tree with bare leaves in winter. For baobabs, they lose their leaves to conserve water during the dry season, and they'll actually return to leaf and flower just before the wet season begins. So generally sort of late October, early November-ish, they'll start to come into leaf, like you can see with this Adansonia Czar. So flowers wise, I must say I have not seen any flowers. The trip we were there, the trees were just barely coming into leaf. The previous photo that I showed you of the Adansonia Czar was one of the most leaf trees we saw. Most of them were still very, very bare. So but pollinators, bats, moths and lemurs. And the flower has a really quite unique structure. So it's got this sort of fused tube of stamens here. The shape and color of the flower varies with each species, but that tube produces the nectar which attracts the bats, moths, and lemurs to the flower. The flowers only last a single night. And thus, the most common colours are sort of white or cream, which helps to attract the moths. But flowers can also be bright yellow or dark red in colour. So baobabs are also used extensively by the local people. The bark is used for roofs and walls of houses. So both of these trees are Adansonia grandidieri. That is me. That's one of our Malagasy drivers who jumped in there with me for a photo. So it gives you an idea of the size of these trees. A tree of this size is probably estimated to be in the vicinity of anywhere between 500 to 1200 years old. But you can see these really weird sort of shapes cut into the trunk, and that's where the bark's been removed. It's used for roofs and walls on traditional houses. But the bark can also be broken up and sort of made into rope or used for weaving baskets and things like that. The one thing I found really interesting, if you take big chunks of bark out, and you'll see most notably on this one here, it goes the whole way around the trunk. And if we did that with Australian trees or a lot of the European trees, we'd actually ring bark the tree and kill it, but it doesn't seem to have that kind of impact on these baobabs. They just scar up and kind of move on. The fruit of the trees is eaten. Apparently it's got a citrus flavour and it is very, very high in vitamin C. So in order to actually get the fruit, you can see on this tree here, these little sort of weird looking bumpy dots. What the locals will actually do is hammer a piece of wood into the tree, and they sort of use these pieces of wood at various points as a bit of a ladder to be able to get up into the tree to get access to the fruit. So the pulp of the fruit, and so this is a Adansonia grandidieri fruit here. It's a bit bigger than a grapefruit in size to give you an idea of the size of the fruit. The pulp is also ground up and used for consumption, as well as the seeds can be eaten. But the pulp is also used by the local women as a face mask, like you can see here, and it's used to prevent aging and make the skin look beautiful, which is probably not surprising given that it's very, very high in vitamin C. So baobabs are also used by the locals as wells to store water during the dry season. Both of the images provided here came from Cyril Cornu. He's a French botanist I was lucky to meet while I was in Madagascar, and he basically lives there now and has done a lot of research on the Madagascan baobab species. And he's produced 2 documentaries. His previous film, Baobabs Between Land and Sea, won 35 awards. His most current film, Momodi, The Last Baobab Digger, which is literally about this gentleman whose name is Momodi, who is trying to teach the younger Malagasy people about the technique to dig out the baobabs to use them for water storage. It's currently won 9 awards in categories relating to documentaries on culture, heritage, ecology, and environment. So baobabs are very, very difficult to age. They don't form rings like normal trees. They have a much more fibrous structure. Many of them actually die from lightning strikes. They're basically the tallest things around. So when there is a thunderstorm and you're the tallest thing around, you tend to be what gets hit by lightning. But of course, they also die of old age and environmental impacts such as deforestation and farming. Upon the death of the tree, and you can see this is also Adansonia grandidieri, and I'll talk a little bit why this looks very, very different to the avenue of the baobab species. But you can see here we've got a tree that's died and another one down here. Upon their death, basically this entire tree will rot away in just 3 to 4 years. It'll be entirely gone. Which is really quite incredible. And you can see the sort of structure looks very, very different to what we'd expect if we saw a fallen down or cut down tree in a gum tree, for example. So I'm now just going to talk you through the species of baobab that I have been lucky enough to see in habitat. So, of course, Avenue of the Baobabs, which I mentioned before, you'll see these little sort of brown timber structures here. They are doing replanting in Avenue of the Baobab. They've got a sort of education centre set up over the back here. So they are doing a lot of work to try and ensure the longevity of this region. They do understand the importance of these trees, but also their importance to ecotourism, that people come to this region specifically to see these trees. So to give you an idea of the size, this is an American friend of mine who was on the tour with me. He would be, I reckon, probably 6'2" in the old language. Don't ask what that is in meters. He'd be about 6'2". So this gives you an idea of just how big these trees are. It's estimated that they're about 1,500 years old, and the average sort of height is about 30 meters. And you can see there are younger trees sort of coming up in various regions as well, and some sort of younger trees that have been planted here. So just another shot of Avenue of the Baobabs. It's just incredible. Doesn't matter how much you photograph these trees. They are just really, really incredible. I found this one was just a great shot. All the smaller trees in the background had, of course, to give it a hug. Really interesting scarring in the tree. But yes, I became a tree hugger on this trip. Hugged lots and lots and lots of baobabs. One of the best times to be at Avenue of the Baobabs is at sunset. We were there for 3 nights of sunsets, and this was probably one of the best lots of sunset photos. Apparently this was absolutely terrible. They get much better sunsets than this, but I was still very, very happy with the photos that I got. And it's amazing how much the trees change in their appearance and how they look depending upon the lighting. So I showed briefly before Adansonia grandidieri that looked very different, and this is those plants. So this is Adansonia grandidieri, and it does look incredibly different to the ones at Avenue of the Baobab. So why is that? So this is much further southwest than Morindava, a place called Andava Dawaka. And so in this region, Grandidieri is growing in very, very different conditions. So Avenue of the Baobabs, you saw from the road, it's kind of this red soil. Here they're growing in very white, sandy, gravelly soil. It's quite a salty region, not far from here. There's massive salt plains. And so that's resulted in this much shorter, sort of stunted, pot belly looking Grandidieri. The other thing that's interesting with these trees, you'll see the branches are also much shorter and much more stumpy. And that's because the branches are trimmed by the locals who use the leaves to feed the zebu, their cattle. So very, very different. So here's just a couple more pictures of those trees, very, very different looking. The other really interesting thing that we saw on the baobabs is not unique to this specific population. We saw it in quite a few places, is they have this sort of fungus that grows on them, which gives this really, really beautiful, really interesting sort of tattoo pattern. Doesn't seem to do the tree any harm, just very, very interesting looking. So there's Guillermo to give you an idea of how different these trees are compared to Avenue of the Baobabs. And a couple of members of our tour group here and our 3 drivers. So we had 2 Malagasy and a French botanist called Christophe, who drove us around with Guillermo guiding us. So, Adansonia rubra stipa, thus named the rubra, coming from the red colour of the bark. It's really common to see rubra stipa twisted together like this. There's question around whether this was originally 2 trees growing very close together that have caused this sort of twisting. Or whether it's a single tree that has branched early and it's sort of 2 separate trunks twisting together. Interestingly, they are really quite common, and each sort of Malagasy town tends to have its what they call the baobab amoureux, the French word for lovers. A little bit of a Romeo and Juliet type story of a boy and a girl from different tribes who loved each other, who weren't allowed to be together. And so, you know, they killed themselves and came back as a baobab tree forever entwined in love. So the first time you see one and you have a local tell you this story, you just think it's the most amazing thing ever. And then, of course, you know, you find out that these are actually really, really common and kind of everywhere. It's like a lot of towns in the southwest will have a really, really big baobab tree, which they call Mother of the Forest. And so there's also a lot of Mother of the Forest. But it's still really interesting to hear the locals tell you their story and how they use that story for the local tourists. And I'm sure, you know, somewhere there is some truth in the story. So here's another couple of examples of rubra stipa. And so again, you can see that very, very sort of red colored bark. These don't get as tall, probably only, 5 or so meters tall. So much, much shorter trees in comparison to Grandidieri. They do have a very similar fruit shape, so a sort of rounded fruit, and again, you know, slightly bigger than a grapefruit. Adansonia Za is very, very similar looking to Grandidieri. Does have some sort of growing region overlap with Grandidieri as well. It tends to be sort of a bit narrower at the top and wider at the bottom. like Grandidieri is. So the main way to actually tell the difference, I'm sure there are other ways, but for the untrained eye, look for fruit. So you'll see these fruit are sort of quite long in shape rather than the classic round shape. So sort of think banana passion fruit shape, but much bigger than a banana passion fruit. And so again, just for size comparison, we've got people here. So these trees, again, were probably in the vicinity of around 30 meters tall and a similar age to the trees that we saw at Avenue of the Baobabs. Again, also lots of younger trees around. Another Adansonia Zar. Sadly, we were told by our drivers that it was likely that this tree was dying as indicated by its bark. So basically, as the tree starts to die, the top just gets too heavy for it and it starts to collapse. And so you can see all these weird creases in the bark. And there were a few other signs that sort of indicated that this tree was dying, which was quite sad to see. So we're leaving Madagascar now, and we're in Africa, in Namibia to be exact. And this is where I saw my first Adansonia digitata a few years after the Madagascar trip, thanks to COVID and lockdowns. But it didn't take me long to get back to doing a bit of tree hugging the second I saw my first big digitata. So they are quite different looking. I sort of expected something a little bit more like the Malagasy trees, but you can definitely tell that they are Adansonia. So this is at Apupa Falls, so up the very, very northwest of Namibia, right on the border with Angola. And I just love this. If you have a look, this is actually the trunk of an Adansonia that has fallen over at some point. I imagine a very, very long time ago. And whether this is a tree that has kind of grown in the trunk or was originally a branch on this big trunk, I don't know. But this is a massive, big, huge tree. This is not a small tree. And this trunk would have been almost as tall as me, and I'm like 5'6.5". Quite huge. So you can see here's Apupa Falls over here. And so more Adansonia sort of digitata. There were quite a few areas where it was going right on the edge of the cliff. So this is Apupa Falls. So on this side, we have Namibia. And on this side, we have Angola. So this river and the falls is the border between Namibia and Angola. And so also in northern Namibia, more Adansonia digitata and some of the fruit. So the fruit of Adansonia digitata, these aren't fully ripe. They will go brown like the ones we saw in Madagascar. But shaped more like Adansonia Zar. Okay, so that sort of banana passion fruit kind of long sort of shape. This Adansonia digitata was in Kruger National Park in South Africa and is believed to be the most southern Adansonia digitata in South Africa. Again, whether or not that's true, I don't know. I think sometimes they tell these stories to the tourists to make us think we've seen something exciting. Doesn't worry me whether it is or it isn't. It's just another absolutely fabulous tree. This was a huge tree. I don't know what the size of the base was. We couldn't get out of the vehicle because, of course, we were in a national park, in a national park, you're not allowed out of your vehicle. And also because, of course, there are things running around that can eat you, which is why you're not allowed out of your vehicle. So I've seen 4 of the 8 species, and that means I've got 4 species remaining on my bucket list. I'm determined that it will be when, not if, I get to see them. And to be honest, I really can't wait. It's been an amazing experience seeing the 4 that I have. So I'm hoping my next trip is going to be back to Madagascar, which wouldn't be a bad thing because I get to see more amazing reptiles. A couple of chameleons here for you, a little skink, gecko, maybe, not sure, a lizard, the absolutely stunning views of this beautiful country. The sandstone massifs just give you the most fantastic backdrops, beautiful blue skies most days. Amazing beaches with nobody on them, which was the absolute best thing. Not that we spent a lot of time on beaches because not a lot of plants on the beaches, but still nice to see. Great local people and local sites, wonderful things to see, and of course some amazing plants. So I really can't wait to get back there and knock off the next 3 species of Malagasy baobab. So if you're interested in learning more about baobabs or Adansonia, there's a couple of references here. And if you're interested in knowing more about the plants of Madagascar, there are some really great books out there on Madagascan succulent plants. If you want to see pictures of my trips, you can follow me on Facebook, Insta, and YouTube under Everything Sucks. And if you are thinking about doing a plant tour, I can highly recommend Guillermo Rivera from Plant Expeditions. You can check out his tours on his website. And so to finish up, I took about 7,000 photos in Madagascar, and out of all 7,000, this is my favorite. So this is a view from the sandstone massif in Asalo National Park. Just the most beautiful place. I loved it. And a tiny bit of Malagasy for you, Misotra Betsaka, which is thank you very much. And any questions?
Done.